Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Meidiana Salsabila, number 20 from Group 5.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhamad Tubagus.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Dyah Setyowati, number 7.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Meidiana Salsabila, number 20 from Group 5. First, I will explain you about sampling, design, and procedures. Sampler or census. Population is an aggregate of all elements which are divided into several general characteristics and which form the universe for marketing research purposes. Number parameters usually consist of numbers. Information about parameters may be obtained by taking a sample or census. The sample is a subgroup of population elements selected to participate in a study, while the census is a complete enumeration of population elements of research or research objects. So the next is sampling design process. The first is define the target population, determine the sampling frame, select a sampling technique, determine the sample size, and the last is execute the sampling process.
Probability sampling techniques. Probability sampling techniques consist of simple random sampling, systematic sampling, stratified sampling, cluster sampling, and other probability sampling techniques. For the first, simple random sampling, a probability sampling technique in which each element in the population has a known and equal probability of selection. Every element is selected independently of every other element and the sample is drawn by a random procedure from a sampling frame. For 2, systematic sampling, a probability sampling technique in which the sample is chosen by selecting a random starting point and then picking every interval element in succession from the sampling frame. Next, stratified sampling, a probability sampling technique that uses a two-step process to partition the population into subpopulation or strata. Elements are selected from each stratum by a random procedure. Cluster sampling. First, the target population is divided to mutually exclusive subpopulation called cluster. Then a random sample of cluster is selected based on a probability sampling technique. Such a simple random sampling for each selected cluster, either all the elements are included in the sample or a sample of element is drawn probabilistically. Next, other probability sampling techniques. Forward sequential sampling, a probability sampling technique in which the population elements are sampled sequentially. The data collection and analysis are done at each stage, and the decision is made as to whether additional population elements should be sampled. 2. Double sampling, a sampling technique in which certain population elements are sampled twice. Next, choosing non-probability versus probability. The choice between a non-probability sample and a probability must be based on considerations such as the nature of the study, the relative magnitude of the sampling error against the sample, variability in the population, as well as statistical and operational considerations such as cost and time.
Use of non-probability and probability sampling. Non-probability sampling is used in the concept test, pitch test, name test, and copy test, where the projection for populations are usually not needed. In the study, interest centered on the proportion of the sample that gave various response or expressed various attitudes. Study that use probability sampling generally use telephone interviews. Stratified and systematic sampling is combined with several forms or random digit calls to select respondents. The next is
Internet sampling. The first is problems in taking samples online. The main problem associated with internet sampling is representability due to lack of computer ownership and internet access. Sampling of potential respondents who surf the internet is meaningful if the samples produced represent the target population. In software, computers, networks, technical publishing, semiconductor, and postgraduate education, it quickly become feasible to use the internet to sample respondents for quantitative research such as surveys. However, sampling on the internet may not be practical for many consumer products that are not computer-oriented.
The next is international marketing research. The use of the internet sampling in the international marketing research must consider the possibility that the availability and use of the internet can vary greatly between countries. Many countries may lack a safer hardware and software, and this lack of the technical infrastructure makes internet research difficult and expensive. In addition, there may be cultural difference in attitudes towards and use of the internet. To achieve comparability in sample composition and representation, it may be desirable to use different sampling techniques in different countries.
Ethics in marketing research. Researchers have several responsibilities toward clients and respondents in the sampling process. To be pleased with the client, the researcher must develop a sample sampling design that is appropriate for controlling sampling and non-sampling errors. So now I will explain you about sampling, final and initial sample size determination. Definitions and symbols. The first is parameter, statistic, linear population correction, precision level, confidence interval, confidence level. The sampling distribution. Sampling distribution is the distribution of sample statistical values calculated for each sample that may be drawn from the target population under the specified sampling plan. An important task in marketing research is to calculate statistics such as sample average and sample proportions and use them to estimate the true population values. Statistical approach to determining sample size. Some qualitative factors must also be considered when determining sample size. These include the importance of the decision, the nature of the study, the number of variables, the nature of the analysis, the size of the sample used in similar research, the level of occurrence, the degree of completion, and research constraints. The statistically determined sample size is the number of clean or final samples left over after removing potential respondents who didn't meet the requirements or who didn't complete the interview. Depending on the level of occurrence and resolution, the initial sample size may need to be much larger.
The next is the confidence interval approach. Sample size determination is average. The approach used here to build confidence interval can be adjusted to determine the sample size that will produce the desired confidence interval. Suppose the researchers want to estimate monthly household expenditure for the department store spending more precisely, so that the estimate is within $5,000 of the true population value. Sample size determinants proportion is R3, and one is determine the level of precision. Second is determine the level of trust, and the third is determine the value associated with the level of trust. Is the multiple characteristics and parameters. In the commercial marketing research, several characteristics, not just one, are introduced in any project. Research are asked to estimate several parameters, not just one. Calculation of sample size in this case must be based on the consideration of all parameters that must be estimated. So far, the discussion of determining sample size has been based on traditional statistical inference methods and has assumed simple random sampling. Other probability sampling technique. The determination of sample size for other probability sampling techniques is based on the same basic principles. The researchers must determine the level of precision and level of confidence and estimate the sampling distribution from the test statistic. In simple random sampling, costs don't enter directly to the calculation of sample size. In addition, the researcher must take account of variability in strata of variability within and between clusters. After the overall sample size is determined, the sample is divided between strata of or cluster.
The next is adjusting the statistically determined sample size. Statistically determined sample size represents the final of clean sample size that must be achieved to ensure the parameters are estimated with the desired level of precision and the level of confidence given. To reach this final sample size, a much larger number of potential respondents must be contacted. In other words, the initial sample size must be much larger because usually the incidence rate and completion rate is less than 100%. The next is calculating of response rates. The American Survey Research Organization Board defines response rate as response rate is a number of complete interviews divided number of eligible units in sample. Now, consider one stage sample case where screening is needed to determine the eligibility of respondents. That is, to ascertain whether respondents are eligible to participate in the survey. Effort to filter each respondent will produce one of three results. The first is fulfill the requirements. The second is do not meet the requirements. The third is are not curtailed.
Non-response issue in sampling. The two major non-response issues is sampling or improving response rates and adjusting for non-response. Non-response error arises when some of the potential respondents included in the sample do not respond. This is one of the most significant problems in survey research. Next, international marketing research. When conducting marketing research abroad, statistical estimation of sample size may be difficult because estimation of population variance may not be available. Therefore, sample size is often determined by qualitative consideration. For 1, the importance of the decision. 2, the nature of the study. 3, the number of variables. 4, the nature of the analysis. 5, the sample size used in similar studies. 6, the incidence rate. 7, the completion rate. And 8, research constraints. If statistical sample size estimates are tried at all, it must be realized that realized that estimate of population variance can vary from country to country. Ethics in marketing research. Although the determination of statistical sample size is usually objective, however, it is vulnerable to ethical issues. As can be seen from the formula, the sample size depends on the standard deviation of the variables, and there is no way to know the exact standard deviation until the data has been collected. Estimate the standard deviation are used to calculate sample size. This estimate is based on secondary data assessment or small pilot studies. In such situation, the researcher that has the responsibility to discuss this matter with the client and jointly decide on the action to be taken. The ethical consequence of miscommunication of confidence interval of survey estimates based on statistical sample are underlined in political polls.
Index number. Relative index figures. This index number is used if we want to see changes in the condition of a commodity from various periods. Therefore, the focus of attention is only one commodity. As for the calculation of the price index, the price change in question is the price change for the commodity concerned and doesn't reflect price changes in general. So the formula is PN over PO multiplied by 100. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Meidiana Salsabila, number 20 from group 5. First, I will explain you about sampling, design, and procedures. Sample or census. Population is an aggregate of all elements which are divided into several general characteristics and which form the universe for marketing research purposes. Number parameters usually consist of numbers. Information about parameters may be obtained by taking a sample or census. The sample is a subgroup of population elements selected to participate in the study, while the census is a complete enumeration of population elements of research object. So the next is sampling design process. The first is define the target population, determine the sampling frame, select a sampling technique, determine the sample size, and the last is execute the sampling process. So now I will explain you about sampling, final and initial sample size determination. Definitions and symbols. The first is parameter, statistic, linear population correction, precision level, confidence interval, confidence level. The sampling distribution. Sampling distribution is the distribution of sample statistical values calculated for each sample that may be drawn from the target population under the specified sampling plan. An important task in marketing research is to calculate statistics such as sample average and sample proportions and use them to estimate the true population values. Index number. Relative index figures. This index number is used if we want to see changes in the condition of a commodity from various periods. Therefore, the focus of attention is only one commodity. As for the calculation of the price index, the price change in question is the price change for the commodity concerned and doesn't reflect price changes in general. So the formula is PN over PO multiplied by 100. Aggregate index figures. The first is simple aggregate price index or IP. So the formula is the number of PN over the number of PO multiplied 100. And the second is simple aggregate quantity price index or IQ. So the formula is number of QN over the number of QO multiplied by 100.
Weight aggregate index. Weighted index numbers are the most widely used index number because in reality not all commodities can be considered equally important. The level of value of the importance of the commodity can be reflected in quality for the price index or price for the quantity index, or it can also be reflected in other criteria. This important value is used as weighting. General formula. There are two general formula and are listed on the screen on the other side. The first is weighted aggregate price index. The formula is can see in the screen on the side. And the second is the average price index is relatively weighted. And the formula is see in the screen on this side.
The last payers index number. Last payers index number is a price index that is weighted for its base year quantity or a quantity index that is weighted for its base year price. Because of the weighting of the price or quantity of goods in the base year, the value of this index tends to be greater overestimate because the price and quantity of goods tends to increase from time to time. Last payers price index. The last payers price index is obtained through the formula. OP is sigma Pn multiple QO over sigma PO multiple QO multiple 100.
Past index number. The past index number is the price index figure weighted for the current year quantity or the quantity index price that is the weighted for the current year. The value of time tends to be lower because rising price tends to reduce demand for goods. And the formula is our two general formula and are listed in the screen on the other side.
Chain index and real weights. Chain index is index number that are arranged sequentially from year to year are called chain index. Real weights. It is this deflation of the cost of living index on wage in the form of real money. So, even though salaries go up from year to year, wages may actually drop, resulting in decreasing purchasing power.
The next is productivity index. Production is the amount of output produced by a production process, while productivity is the ratio between output and input. The formulation is I is productivity of the current period divided basic period productivity times 100.